But I want to show you guys what's going on in this country, in case you guys forgot the way that Donald Trump somehow forgot, in the state of Alaska, while we're giving $40 billion to Argentina.
Well, Typhoon Halong sparking disastrous and deadly flooding in Alaska. This weekend, floodwaters swept through coastal communities in the western part of the state. And as of this morning, several dozen people have had to be rescued. But tragically, one person has died. 2 others remain missing.
Yeah, still shocking video, even as we look at it on this Wednesday from out of the weekend. Alaska DOT saying a combined 50 airports and roads were damaged as a result of this. Access and communication to these remote communities severed in some cases, and more than 1,000 people taking shelter across the region. As we know, crews are rolling in to help in the response and recover. We have Taylor Southson, national spokesperson of the American Red Cross, joining us now. And Taylor, I think what's so wild, I saw the number 50 for airports and roads, but was reminded that a lot of these communities are so remote, they rely on these airports for small planes to navigate back and forth. And without that accessibility, it really puts them at even greater risk in recovering from this.
Yeah, so about 90% of Alaska is actually inaccessible by road. So these communities that have been impacted are part of that 90%. There is no access to these villages except via plane and sometimes boat, depending on if, there are river access to these villages. So this has made the disaster response particularly difficult.
An American state is flooding. How much have you heard about it? Have you seen major news networks talking about it? Have you seen major news networks talking about the devastation and the people's entire lives being upended and being destroyed? People dying, people missing, people not even really knowing everything that's happening because communication is scant. Have you heard about it? The guy who's bailing out Argentina isn't talking about it.
Right now, the American Red Cross is working with our state, our local, and our tribal governments to provide as much disaster assistance as we can. Right now, we have about half a dozen volunteers are staged in one of the hub communities of Bethel. That is the closest, less remote communities to the major villages that have been impacted. You're seeing photos of villages of Kipnuk and Quingillingok. Those are the ones that are, we're seeing the most significant impact. And the state and the tribal governments have evacuated a number of people out of those villages to these hub villages where we're able to provide more of a wraparound support. There are some areas in Alaska where we have yet to hear what the storm impacts were because we have no connectivity with them. So it really is a challenge for disaster responders to begin to even evaluate the level of damage that we're seeing, across the more than 40 communities that have been impacted by this storm.
Local and tribal communities are left to do this on their own in coordination with that woman talking about from the Red Cross. Nothing from the federal government, nothing from these guys who came into office and said things like FEMA, we're shutting down because I don't want those Democrats to have any help. And by the way, he's screwing over Republicans too, because he honestly doesn't give a damn about anybody. But up in Alaska, they're left in the lurch, doing it on their own. As we saw, it's very inaccessible to get to many of these areas, but Donald Trump doesn't give a damn. This whole administration doesn't give a damn. Federal dollars instead are going to invading American cities, and they're going to mass deportations. They're not going to preserving people's lives. They're definitely not going to preventing any of these things happening to these folks' lives. They literally don't care. Let me show you a little bit more of that destruction, because we always have to see these racist faces all the time. How about we see what it is that they're doing to the country? Here's the effects of white supremacist leadership in this country. he hires the best and the brightest, and they bring the golden era to the United States of America. That is, unless he thinks your life doesn't matter, and he thinks a lot of people's lives don't matter. So this is one of the first planes that is carrying evacuees from the displaced, devastating flooding, and this is from the western part of Alaska. And then they're now arriving in Anchorage. Folks just jammed up in this airplane, and who knows who they left or what their lives may end up like next. These are the people's lives they don't care about. It's a great perspective from this woman from Alaska who knows the indigenous approach and the indigenous experience that they've had there. I didn't know about this either, and we should start listening to people that are living the experience that we keep dismissing because we're too busy focusing on the rich oligarchs that are destroying the country. Listen to this.
People are missing, and families have lost everything. And yet almost no one is talking about it. Right now, it's only local media covering these stories, or us, community members. But this deserves national and international attention. To understand why these storms hit so hard, we have to remember our history. Once Alaska became a U.S. territory in 1949, the federal government forced our people and our children to attend school, or their parents faced incarceration. This policy broke apart traditional ways of life and forced Yupik people to permanently settle into areas of land. But settler colonialism forced us to live on small, flood-prone patches of land that were never meant for permanent settlement. Now, as the Arctic warms faster than anywhere else on the Earth, storms like this are growing even stronger, and they're destroying entire communities. This is not just a natural disaster. This is climate injustice. We need the world to see what's happening here. Climate change in the Arctic isn't just about our polar bears or melting ice. It's about our people. Our communities are on the front lines, and we need the world to pay attention. To those watching this, to those in media, to those especially who look to Indigenous peoples for our stories and our knowledge, do what you can to make this injustice visible, not only to the rest of this country, but to the world, because this isn't a story that just happened yesterday or years ago. This is happening right now as I speak.
Hang on, this gets worse. This gets worse. So we've got this flooding going on in Alaska, right? Do you know what happened earlier this year? New York Times points out that 5 months before these catastrophic floods swept through the Alaska native village of Kipnuk on Sunday, tearing many houses off of their foundations, the Trump administration canceled a $20 million grant intended to protect the community from such extreme flooding. The grant from the Environmental Protection Agency was designed to help stabilize the riverbank on which Kipnuk is built, protecting it from the twin threats of erosion and flooding. Pause for a second. They canceled a $20 million grant. They just committed $40 billion to Argentina to make sure that the rich oligarchs that are controlling our entire government, to make sure that they don't lose on their bad bets because they don't know what they're doing. Back to this devastation and what they did here. In May, the EPA revoked that grant, which was issued at the end of the Biden administration, saying it was, quote, no longer consistent with the agency's priorities. Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator, boasted on social media that he was eliminating wasteful DEI and environmental justice grants, referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and programs to help communities facing disproportionate level of environmental threats. Every time these guys talked about getting rid of DEI, they figured and they knew, honestly, that enough people who are also white supremacists went, yeah, those minorities, any kind of it, because they're not me. Why should my money go to that? When that money's not going to your sorry, poor ass either. But Lee Zeldin posted and boasted about how he's eliminating all this because DEI, DEI, DEI. So instead, people's lives are devastated by it. Here's more from the New York Times. Senator Lisa Murkowski, remember her? Republican from Alaska, said that the flooding underscored the need for funding for underserved communities in the state. And earlier this year, Murkowski called on the Trump administration to ensure that funding for Alaska Native communities did not get swept up in the president's opposition to DEI initiatives. Here's a quote. This administration prioritizes lowering costs, but minimizing the impacts of a disaster like this before it occurs is far cheaper than rebuilding afterward, to say nothing of the toll that these events take on people's lives, is what she said in a statement. Whether you call it climate change or once-in-a-generation extreme weather, no community in the wealthiest country on earth should lack the basic infrastructure needed to keep its people safe. That's what Lisa Murkowski said, in opposition to Donald Trump and his sweeping initiatives and everything he's saying. It was Biden and Barack Hussein Obama, so I'm done doing it all with no thought process. I want to remind you guys of who Lisa Murkowski is. That same Republican who had issues with the things that Donald Trump was doing, but then still signed on to all those things that Donald Trump was doing. And when she did it, many people were saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why talk when your actions support what it is that you say you're against? Remember this exchange with Lisa Murkowski?
Senator Paul said that that your vote was a bailout for Alaska at the expense of the rest of the country.
Oh my God.
That's what Senator Paul said.
My question was easy. Senator, we've got the...
I didn't say it, ma'am. I'm just asking for your response.
My response is I have an obligation to the people of the state of Alaska. And I live up to that every single day. I fight for my state's interests, and I make sure that Alaskans are understood. And so when people suggest that federal dollars go to one of our 50 states in a, quote, bailout, I find that offensive.
By the way, she was talking about how the reasons that she was one of those last deciding votes to jump on to this bill that Republicans passed that are destroying more people in more states than before, because they've always been on board for that she's offended by that. She knows it's going to hurt people in this country, but that's not a bailout. If she's looking to protect the people of her state, how are the people of your state doing right now? And by the way, that little bailout that was dangled in front of her face, that they're calling a bailout, that she was taking some funds to help certain fishermen, that got taken away too. So they promised you stuff, they took it away, and they keep on playing your ass. One of the ways that people got fooled by this guy was now, during this shutdown, him talking about what it is that they're doing to destroy the country and get rid of more Democrat policies and agencies and initiatives. This is what he consistently says that I guess works.
They should really make a deal. So what we're doing, I mean, they call him Darth Vader, but he's actually a very nice person, Russell Vogt. But Russell Vogt is really terminating tremendous numbers of Democrat projects.
Darth Vader is eliminating a bunch of Democrat initiatives. He's destroying all the things that Democrats are about. Democrat projects. And you saw Kash Patel's sorry ass standing behind him smirking and laughing about how they're destroying Democrat projects. Because that's good for the country. Being completely divisive, dividing it down the middle, and then trying to siphon more money from folks that you say get nothing back in return. Senator Tim Sheehy, he's a younger guy. He's in Montana. I believe maybe he's in his first term there as a senator in Montana. And he's a hardcore, big-time MAGA guy. He got into office based off of kissing Donald Trump's ass. So Donald Trump is taking away, don't forget, he just said, Donald Trump is taking away Democrat projects. Caitlin Collins has to let this guy know what's happening in the state of Montana, because the senator that's from the state of Montana has no clue.
The Department of Energy just canceled $1 billion to the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. Mm-hmm. Part of that covers your state of Montana, and your governor actually praised it when it was happening, saying it was going to create good-paying Montana jobs and boost American-made energy. They just yanked $1 billion from that. So is that taking away good-paying jobs in Montana?
Of course it is. As I said, we want the government to be open. You should be saying this to Chuck Schumer, who's closing the government down. I'm agreeing we should have the government open right now. This is an unnecessary shutdown.
But that you're acknowledging that what the Trump administration just pulled in funding is hurting your state.
Having troops not being able to fulfill their functions, having law enforcement officers, having air traffic controllers not be able to direct flights into our airports in Montana hurts our state. Not having federal employees attending, showing up to farm service agency offices during cattle shipping season. That hurts our state. Not having Department of Transportation employees overseeing our highways, our bridges, our airways, our road construction efforts. All those things are hurting every state. So this shutdown is not a good thing, and that's why we don't want it to continue. That's why we voted. That's why we've now voted 8 times to reopen the government, and we've not been supported by our friends across the aisle.
Yeah, we pushed Democrats on their stance. We've had many of your colleagues on the show. But on this hub specifically, I mean, that is the Trump administration didn't have to make that decision. They decided to pull that $1 billion from your state. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I think the reality is we wouldn't be here if the government was still open. And now we're going on week 3 of a pretty unnecessary shutdown.
Well, actually, Chris Wright, the energy secretary, I asked him about that project specifically, and he said they would have done that even if the government wasn't shut down, that was months in the making even before the government shut down.
Well, it's unfortunate we're still shut down. We shouldn't be.
You stupid, stupid son of a bitch. He said about 5 times, well, maybe the Democrats shouldn't shut down the government. I mean, I'm all for the government being open. Maybe the Democrats should shut down the government. Maybe the Democrats shouldn't shut down the government. Maybe the Democrats will go and open up the government. Everything will be great. His brain started and stopped at that talking point that he was fed to then go on TV and talk about, with zero knowledge of even his own state and how they're suffering from, finally at the back end, Caitlin Collins had to tell him, yo, this administration said no matter whether or not their government shut down or not, they were going to toss you a middle finger. This was screwed from the beginning. He heard that sentence, and it's like 5 seconds of silence. How is it possible that my talking point doesn't make any sense? How is it possible that everything that I'm saying is actually screwing myself over? Because they said, we don't care about that government shutdown, bro. We're screwing you over. Now go tell this talking point and get on TV and make a complete ass of yourself. Fucking idiots.